36 on Daybreak, and Martha Stewart, Whitewater, record players, and Rolodexes. They all made news this very week in decades past. Channel 2's Dave McKinley looks back to when those stories and more were all news to you.
10 years ago this week, errant reports on the internet that Niagara Falls had frozen over brought flocks of tourists to take in the sight, only to learn it had not.
What the hell?
Buffalo's North Park Theater reopened after an extensive $500,000 renovation, and the Bills announced that after 6 disastrous seasons, they were suspending the Toronto series, much to the relief of fans and players alike. Then, as now, Russian forces had invaded Ukraine, and it was also the week that Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 disappeared over the Indian Ocean, never to be seen again, under circumstances which remain as much of a mystery today as they were this week in 2014, 20 years ago this week.
Martha Stewart was found guilty on all charges in the federal criminal trial stemming from her sale of M-Clone stock in 2001.
For which the billionaire businesswoman, author, and television personality would later do 5 months in prison. Coleslaw wrestling was the latest craze. And in Western New York, the Ironworkers statue had just been erected outside Salvatore's Garden Place Hotel in Cheektowaga this week in 2004. 30 years ago this week, news coverage was intensifying over the Clintons and a faraway place none of us had ever heard of with a funny little name.
Whitewater had simmered on the back burner for months. Now it's boiling.
The investigation into the Clintons' relationship with the failed Arkansas Savings and Loan,
costing taxpayers $50 million.
There will not be a cover-up.
They've stonewalled, and it does harken back to the Nixon era.
Her moral compass is as strong as anybody's in this country.
Shredding documents, this time allegedly by Hillary Clinton in Little Rock during the '92 election.
Obstruction of justice is now clearly at issue.
Senator Phil Gramm of Texas has raised the specter of impeachment.
Oh, Clinton would be impeached, but not for a few more years and for an entirely different matter. Mike Tyson was still in prison for rape, and we lost John Candy, who just months after shooting his film Canadian Bacon up in the Falls, died at the age of 43 this week in 1994. Speaking of the Falls, 40 years ago this week, Parks Police began ticketing violators in breach of a law about which Regional Parks Director Mario Parastru said the time had come to more strongly enforce.
It's becoming offensive, it isn't very healthy, and certainly for our tourists that come here from all over the world to see something like that, it isn't right for the state park to allow it.
Now the Parks Commission is cracking down.
This week's News to You pop quiz, what relatively new law do you think it was that Niagara Falls State Park was going to start taking a hard line on enforcing this week in 1984? Remember, this was back when
some costs are cut by using a work-for welfare crew to shovel sidewalks around public buildings.
After being approved by the FDA, Nicorette gum was being stocked for the first time in local pharmacies, but you needed a prescription. Seatbelt use was required by law in New York State, but only for people under age 7. And the computers at Erie County's Central Police Services were, by today's standards, rustic at best. If you remember using a Rolodex or the late great Scott Brown, or shopping at Super Duper, or banking at Gold Dome, you might also remember dancing like this to music played on these. Ah, yes, ask your parents, kids, about those awesome and bodacious times we had, for sure, back in the days when it was all news to you.
Hey, vinyl records making a big comeback, though.
Huge comeback.
By the way, the answer to this week's News to You pop quiz, the relatively new law, which Niagara Falls State Park started cracking down on 40 years ago this week, was the Pooper Scooper Law. Starting in 1984, this week, dog owners who failed to clean up after their pets were being issued tickets and faced fines up to $100, which adjusted for inflation would be equivalent of $300 today.
So do you remember that? There was the rumor that the falls froze over?
Do remember that.
And so people, I mean, it's there to see. I mean, how
right,
is it? I mean,
it's pretty easy to post on social that no, right. There is running water over the
But the
falls.
rumor started that it was so cold that perhaps it had frozen.
Yeah, and parts of it had frozen,
right.
But there were still parts that were still flowing.
Right.
Not this week, though, this year. I mean, nothing is freezing over right
Yeah,
now.
the ice boom not needed at all this season as we take a look at